Okay, so many of you out there are pretty much an everyday, everyman painter, pretty much like me. And some of you might get to this stage where you've painted, blocked in all the base colours on your miniatures, and they look pretty good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these. They're all done to a pretty good standard. All of the colours are there, and most of them are right, and all of that stuff. But you're sort of wanting to take it to the next level without sort of going to the extremes that some of the painting tutorials out on the internet might show. I mean, there's some really good painters out there making lovely stuff. But, you're wanting to get the stuff on the table. It's taking you hours. And in the case of me, this Fulsham Jager company here that I'm working on, this has taken me over a week, and I'm not doing anything because it's lockdown. So that's a week of hard work to get a unit, or company in this case, with all the support options to this level. So you really want to make a unit pop, and so you've done all the bases, and you're going to add static grass later, but one of the tricks I do, and I think a lot of you out there probably do as well, but we add a bit of shade, and I'm going to show you how to make the shade wash later. And so the shade wash is going to take a flat miniature. When this focuses, come on, focus, not just on my fingers. There we go. Right. That's what you get when you're filming with a camera. So it's going to take something like this, where everything's done, everything's nice, and it's just going to lift it a little bit. And again, if we can get this to focus, you'll see that all of the creases have got a nice shading to them, and it's sort of added some nice depth to these miniatures. You can see under the helmet, under the rim of the helmet, we've got a nice bit of shade and a nice mould line that I haven't cleaned off. Yeah, but we're everyday, everyman painters. We're about getting it done and making it look good. Okay, so this shading is really important as a step to get your miniatures up to the next level. And with this kind of painting, I've won some painting competitions at tournaments, and I won't beat some of the best guys in the country like Phil Petrie, but when it comes down to it, if you don't enter, you don't win. And sometimes a well painted, averagely well painted army with consistent basing and units that are all done to the same standard will beat a beautifully painted but jarringly uncollected army where all of the bases are different, and the paint jobs are beautiful but different in their style. So yeah, this is me. So what I use for my shading, and people will tell you, go and get null oil from Games Workshop, or quick shade from Army Painter. I don't use that. I use my own concoction, and you wouldn't believe how cheap and easy it is to make. I use two varieties of this. I use a sort of a miniatures grade and a terrain grade. And so basically the terrain grade is just this: artist's acrylic, or student's acrylic, as you're probably more familiar with it being called. And it comes in different colours, obviously, a large amount. So we got 75ml of undiluted acrylic here, and each of these cost me about $4 to $5 each, whereas the larger bottles cost a little bit more. But they go a bit further, because that's a litre. Right. So for my terrain grade, basically all I'm doing is taking this stuff, which is a combination of pigment, medium and water, and thinning it down with a little bit of flow aid to produce something that can be sprayed over terrain and give it the shading that I'm looking for. So, as far as the miniatures grade stuff goes, I mean, this is my concoction here, and as you can see, it's pretty dark, and this was just used on the miniatures that I showed earlier. This is it. It's just a mixture of uh, the pigment, which is basically our artist acrylic, and it's got some medium in it. I add some flow aid, and to make it suitable for miniatures, I add some of this artist's acrylic medium matte. And the reason for that, as I'll explain in just a second, is to change its properties so that it works better on miniatures. So, we'll just have a look at the medium as it comes out of the bottle, and straight away you'll notice that it has got a texture that is quite thick and goopy, and you can see by the way that it's peeking up as I prod it with the brush and pull the brush away that it's got some gel strength, and that's important. So, obviously we've got the pigment part of our paint, and we know what that does. That gives us the colour that we're looking for. And you're probably quite well aware of why we add the flow aid, because we want our paint to be able to go all the way into the corners, and our shade to go all the way into the corners and cover everything. The reason we add the medium is that we want the pigment to concentrate in the corners and leave the greatest amount of shade as a layer of pigment in the corners of our model. And to do this we need viscosity, and that's what the medium provides. It provides the viscosity to form our meniscus. That's the scientific term for the edge of a bubble in the corner of our creases and parts of our model, so that we get our darkest areas right near a firm transition like this. So obviously the more medium we add, the greater time that this bubble has to, the greater depth that this bubble has, because it's the shade has more viscosity. If we don't add enough medium, and this is what quite often happens, the flow aid will allow all of the pigment to evenly distribute across the surface, and then everything will dry evenly. That's not really what we want. I've done this, and I've been trying to work out over the years how to best get the properties of the shade to what I want, and I've found that the concentration of medium is actually quite important to get the effect that I'm after. So the more medium you add, the more of a build-up of a bubble in the corners, a meniscus in the corners, will be. The additional advantage of using this finish flow aid, or dishwasher rinse aid as it is that it's also assists with drying, because it allows the fluid to disperse evenly across the surface. Now, if you get your proportion of flow aid and medium correct, what will happen is the edges out here will dry, and the meniscus will continue to shrink into the corners as the edge of the puddle basically is dried up, and then you'll get your your greatest concentration of pigment in the corners there. Yeah, that's my logic anyway. Of course, I'm not going to just leave it at the shade stage. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do some dry brushing on those miniatures. And it's going to be the lightest, powderiest dry brush I can do, but it will just accentuate the edges of the creases on the uniforms and the edges of the helmets and things like that, and it produces an effective contrast to the shade that I've just added. Oh, just a note. You'll notice here that the intensity of the shade on this piece of paper has decreased as it's dried, and it's going to get less intense, less black as we go on as well. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes when you're putting the shade on, it's going to look slightly too dark, and you're going to go, oh, have I done the right thing? But yeah, again, this is the reason that we have test models. So if you check your shade on a model that you don't need, or a spare infantryman that's done in a similar base uniform colour, you can check that the shade is right, and so you know what the result's going to be when you go ahead and do the whole company like I'm going to do. Right, so you've gone ahead and you've made your wash, and you're happy with the consistency, and you've given it a few tests, and you want to apply it. Well, there's also a couple of tricks you can use when you're applying your wash too. You want to get it on fairly thick, and so this is where the testing comes in. You've got to get the sort of opacity of the final wash down pat, and you've got to work out how much wash to actually leave on the miniature. And you'll notice here that this is pretty dark. Yeah, let's get it to focus. Yeah, this is pretty dark on our sergeant or lieutenant here. But again, as I said, it's going to become less intense on the sort of highlights and more intense in the creases. So it's not going to be too bad, and that's sort of what I look for when I've got my wash. That's the sort of intensity of the shading that I'm looking for. Okay, so the next thing you'll notice that is I'm brushing upwards away from the feet of the model, and this has two effects. First, it means I don't get too much on the base, and I'm trying not to get any on the base at all. And the reason for that is I don't want it to wick away into the sand on the base, because obviously if it's on the base, it's not having its desired effect on the model. So yeah, I'm actually pretty much avoiding the bottoms of the boots, because the boots are black and I don't really need to shade them. But also it has the effect of meaning that I miss out on having the shade wicked away. So once you've got your shade onto your model and you're pretty happy, and you've got used that upward stroke to get the shade into all of the underhanging recesses, just check the tops of the helmets, because you don't want a pool of shade on top of the helmet. So I just use the edge of my thumb to take the shade off the tops of the helmets, so that we don't have a big pool built up and it will look ugly. So yeah, that's pretty much my tips on applying the shade.